I didn't see it coming until a stranger grabbed my arm at Pearson and whispered something that made my blood run cold. It was a Tuesday morning in late October, the kind of gray Toronto day where the sky sits low and heavy and you can smell the first real cold coming in off the lake. I had my carry-on roller, my reading glasses in my shirt pocket, and a coffee from the Tim Hortons by the departure's entrance. Dark roast, no sugar, same as always. My daughter had texted me twice already that morning. First to remind me she'd packed the motion sickness tablets in the front zipper of my bag. Second, just a smiley face. I remember standing there looking at that little yellow circle on my screen and feeling something warm settle in my chest. 63 years old, widower, retired high school vice principal from Mississauga. I thought I knew what my life looked like. I thought I knew who was in it. My wife, Dorothy, passed 4 years ago. Breast cancer, caught late. The last thing she said to me before she went wasn't to me at all. It was to our daughter. She said, "Take care of your father. He pretends he doesn't need it." I was standing right there in the room when she said it. I didn't argue. She was right, and we both knew it. After Dorothy died, my daughter Simone stepped into that space without being asked. She'd call every Sunday evening. She'd show up with groceries I didn't need. She drove me to my cardiologist appointments and sat in the waiting room reading on her phone without once complaining. Her husband, Terrence, always smiled when he saw me, always shook my hand at the door, always asked about my garden. Their 2 boys called me Grandpa Hal and drew me pictures I kept on the fridge until the tape dried out and they fell off the tile. The trip was Simone's idea. She said I needed to get out of the house, that Dorothy would have wanted me to see more of the world while I still had good knees. She booked us 2 seats on the flight to Lisbon. A mother-daughter trip, she called it, a retirement gift to herself since she'd finally made partner at her firm. She invited me because she said she didn't want to walk through a foreign city alone. She said it like that was enough of a reason, like it needed no further explanation. And I accepted like that was enough for me too. We met at the Air Canada check-in counter at Terminal 1. She looked the way she always does when she's got a plan. Coat pressed, hair pinned back, that same focused look her mother used to get when she was working through a problem. She hugged me and smelled like the same shampoo she'd used since university. We checked our bags together. She made sure I had my passport. She handed me a protein bar and said, "Eat this. I know you didn't eat breakfast." I hadn't. She was right. We went through security. She put her laptop in the tray without being asked. She waited on the other side while I fussed with my belt. We got to the gate with an hour to spare, found 2 seats near the window, and she pulled out a travel book on Portugal and started telling me about the best neighborhood to walk through on our first evening. I was only half listening. I was watching the planes on the tarmac and thinking about Dorothy, how she'd always wanted to go to Lisbon, how she'd cut a picture out of a magazine once and stuck it to the door of the medicine cabinet. A tile street, a yellow tram, late afternoon light. I never asked her why that particular picture. I should have. Simone bought us both water at a kiosk near the gate. 2 bottles, same brand. She handed mine to me without looking up from her book and said, "You need to stay hydrated on long flights, dry cabin air." I took the bottle. I said thank you. I didn't open it. About 20 minutes before boarding, I told her I was going to use the washroom and stretch my legs. She said to be back in 10 minutes, that they'd start boarding business class early. I took my carry-on with me. Habit, I suppose, from years of conferences and overnight school trips where you didn't leave your bag unattended. I was walking past a row of payphone booths that nobody used anymore when a woman in a CBSA uniform stepped directly into my path. She was maybe 40, short hair, badge clipped to her lapel. She put her hand on my forearm, not rough, but firm, and said very quietly, without any greeting, "Sir, I need you to come with me right now. Don't speak loudly. If your travel companion is watching, I need you to look like you're being detained." I looked at her. She said, "Please, there's no time to explain everything here. Walk with me." I thought there had been some kind of mix-up. A misread passport flag, maybe. I'd had a hip replacement 2 years ago and I sometimes set off metal detectors. I started to say something and she put one finger up, barely, and shook her head. So I walked with her. She took me through a door marked staff only, down a short corridor with fluorescent lighting and the smell of industrial cleaner, and into a small room with a table, 2 chairs, and a second officer. A younger man, big, standing by the far wall with his arms at his sides. She closed the door. She said, "Mr. Okafor." I said, "How do you know my name?" She said, "We've been watching your gate for the last 40 minutes. My name is Officer Brienne Pelletier. I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly." She pulled a chair out from the table. "Did your daughter hand you a water bottle before you walked over here?" I felt something cold move through me. Not fear exactly. More like the feeling when you're watching a movie and the camera lingers a second too long on something ordinary, and you realize before anything has even happened yet that that ordinary thing is going to matter. I said yes. She said, "Did you drink any of it?" I said no. I was going to, but I looked down at my hand. I was still carrying it. I still have it. She looked at the younger officer. Something passed between them that I didn't have language for. She said, "Can I take that from you?" I set it on the table. My hand was steadier than I expected. She picked it up with a cloth, not her bare hand, and passed it to the younger officer. He left the room. She sat down across from me and folded her hands on the table and said, "I'm going to tell you what we know. I need you to listen before you respond." What she told me took about 6 minutes. I know because I watched the clock above her head without meaning to, the way you do when something is too large to look at directly, so you look at something near it instead. 3 days before our flight, a tip had come in through the RCMP's organized crime unit, anonymous but specific. It named the flight number. It named the departure gate. It described a man traveling with a family member who would not reach his destination alive. The tip had been forwarded to CBSA with enough detail to be taken seriously. They'd pulled the passenger manifest and cross-referenced against recent estate and notary filings in Ontario. My name had appeared. Officer Pelletier told me this calmly, one fact after another. The way you give someone a medical diagnosis, the kindness is in not dressing it up. I said, "What kind of notary filings?" She said, "A power of attorney document filed 8 weeks ago giving full financial and medical decision-making authority to your daughter and her husband in the event of your incapacitation or death. A property transfer document for your home on Erin Mills Parkway, conditional on your death. A beneficiary update on your RIF and your life insurance policy." I sat with that. She said, "Were you aware of these filings?" I said, "I signed a POA, yes." Simone said it was standard, that every parent her age was asking their parents to do it, that it would make things easier if anything ever happened to me. She waited. I said. She walked me through it at her dining room table. Terrence was there. He printed the documents out. I read the first 2 pages. I stopped. I trusted her. She's a lawyer. I trusted her. The younger officer came back. He set a small evidence bag on the table, the water bottle. He said something to Pelletier in a low voice, and her face didn't change, but something in her posture did. She looked at me and said, "The bottle has been flagged for lab confirmation, but the preliminary field screening indicates the presence of a substance consistent with a sedative compound. Not detectable by taste. At the concentration we're looking at on a long international flight, in a passenger with a documented heart condition." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. "I have a heart condition, mild, managed with medication." Simone knew about it because Simone had driven me to the appointments. Simone had sat in the waiting room. Simone had asked the cardiologist questions I hadn't thought to ask. I put both hands flat on the table. I don't know why. Maybe just to feel something solid. I said, "What happens now?" She said, "We're going to go back to the gate. You're going to act as though everything is normal. I'll be visible nearby. My colleague will be at the far end of the gate. We need to let your daughter board. We need her on that jetway." I said, "Why?" She said, "Because we want to give her the chance to do the right thing, and because we need this on camera, in the airport, past the checkpoint. That's how this becomes a criminal matter and not just a civil dispute over paperwork." I said, "And if she doesn't? Do the right thing, I mean." Pelletier looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "Then we have what we need anyway." I walked back to the gate. My legs worked the way legs do when the person inside them has gone somewhere else for a minute. Simone looked up when she saw me and smiled and said I'd almost missed the boarding call. She patted the seat next to her. She was still holding the travel book. She had a page dog-eared near the back, a section on day trips from Lisbon. I could see the header from where I stood. I sat down. I looked at her hands, her face, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the way Dorothy used to. I looked for something there. Some tell. Some flicker of the thing that must have been living inside her for months while she filed documents and printed forms and sat at her dining room table watching me sign them. I didn't see it. That was almost the worst part. They called our boarding group. Simone stood up and put her book in her tote and said, "Ready?" She said it the way you say it about something happy, a trip, an adventure. She looked genuinely pleased. I said, "I think I left something at the kiosk. Go ahead, I'll catch up." She said, "Dad, we're boarding." I said, "I'll be 30 seconds. She went. She walked to the desk and handed over her boarding pass and didn't look back, and I watched her go through the door toward the jetway. I stood there with my carry-on in my empty hands, and I watched my daughter disappear. Officer Pelletier appeared at my elbow 3 seconds later. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. They stopped Simone at the top of the jetway. Terrence was arrested separately. I learned this later, at their home in Oakville, where a second unit was executing a search warrant. 2 laptops, a printed spreadsheet of my assets, text messages dating back 11 months. 11 months. I thought about all the Sunday phone calls inside those 11 months, all the grocery drop-offs, all the time she'd hugged me at the door, and I'd stood there in the frame of my house, watching her drive away, thinking how lucky I was. How lucky Dorothy and I had been to raise someone like that. The CBSA held me at the airport for another 4 hours while I gave a formal statement. A victim services officer came and sat with me. A quiet man named Bradley who brought me a sandwich from the food court and didn't say much. I appreciated that more than I can say. I've had people try to fill silence their whole lives, and I've never once found it helpful. My brother picked me up at 7 that evening. He walked into the arrivals hall and looked at me and said, "Hal," just my name, like a question and an answer at the same time. I let him drive me home without explaining anything in the car. We sat in the driveway for a while with the engine off. He said, "You don't have to talk about it." I said, "I know." He said, "I'll come in." I said, "Okay." He made tea. We sat at the kitchen table under the light Dorothy had picked out at a shop on Queen Street, the one I'd never changed because I still liked looking at it. We didn't say much. My brother is 5 years younger than me and has always been the louder one, the one who fills rooms, and I have never been more grateful for the specific way he went quiet that night, the way he just sat there and let me be wherever I was. The charges came through in stages over the following weeks. Attempted administration of a noxious substance, fraud, conspiracy. Terrence cooperated with investigators. Turned evidence, I was told, fairly quickly. I don't know what he told them. I don't want to know. I hired a lawyer to review all the documents that had been filed. The POA, the property transfer, everything. Some of it was reversed. Some of it took months. It is not a simple thing to untangle your life from someone who has spent nearly a year preparing to take it from you. I didn't go to Lisbon. I went in the spring instead, by myself, because I decided I still wanted to go. I booked the hotel Dorothy had earmarked once in a magazine. I walked through the neighborhood with the tiled streets and the yellow trams. I found a cafe on a hill in the afternoon and sat outside with an espresso and the kind of thin, warm sunlight you only get in that latitude, and I thought about her. I thought about the fact that she'd said, "Take care of your father." And I thought about how Simone had stood in that room while Dorothy said it and nodded. And I thought about how much can change in a person and how little of it you see coming when you love them. I didn't cry in the cafe. I waited until I was back in the hotel room, alone, with the shutters open and the sound of the city coming up from the street below. Then I let myself. I'm not telling you this because I want your pity. I'm not telling you this to make you suspicious of the people you love. That's not a life worth living. I'm telling you because I was a vice principal for 22 years. I spent my entire career telling young people that the kindness of strangers matters, that paying attention to someone's well-being, even when you have no obligation to, is not a small thing. A CBSA officer at Pearson Airport looked at a manifest and a tip and a bottle of water and made a decision to use her next 10 minutes differently than she had to. I am standing here because of 10 minutes. Dorothy would have known what to say about that. She always found the right words before I did, but I've had a lot of time to sit with it since then, and what I've come to is this. The people who protect you aren't always the ones who are supposed to. Sometimes it's someone who doesn't know your name until she has to, who pulls you through a staff door by the arm and says please with enough weight in it that you just go. If you've got people like that somewhere in your orbit, the ones who see something and say something even when it costs them, hold on to that. That's not nothing. That's everything.